All right. Well, we are continuing to work through the mission of God for the family. And I promised yesterday that we would talk about the transferability of life today. And so, going to start right there about how it is that we tend to think of our life as something that we can live and that we can affect people if we can maybe change their mind about a thing and they think differently, or if we, you know, do something for them that touches them, changes them physically, affects them physically. But the reality is that God built the kind of world where when I can live my life for others, they can end up they can end up uh, receiving my life as a gift in lots and lots of different ways, but in particular, in the way that God joins us together in covenant. It makes it possible. It's one of the things that happens when we're united together into the covenants that God has established, that there are avenues that God sets up in that moment where our life can be given away, and other people can receive it and live more because of the way that we live our life. And I want to look at Ephesians 5 as one of those possibilities. And this is in particular talking about in marriage, but the principle we'll see, or what you see throughout the scriptures, that the principle isn't just a marriage in marriage, but it is particularly in marriage. In Ephesians 5, um, when Paul is talking about federal headship or corporate headship or covenantal headship. There's different ways that you can, different names for it. He says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it." Right. So that he gave himself for the church, that his life was transferred to the church. And so the church was able to live because it had received the life of Christ that was given for him. And it wasn't just in his death, although that was a very particular, poignant way that he gave his life for it. It's also it's he really gave his life for the church from his incarnation on. I mean, there's, I think, good reason to think that God was giving his life from creation on, but in particular here, this is talking about Christ gave himself for the church, and that's throughout his whole life. Right? Uh, when he was born to Mary, when he lived as a child, when he lived as a young man, when he begins his ministry, you know, in his baptism, in his temptation, all of these different ways, he is living a perfect life, like living a life without sin, so that he can be like us in every way, but without sin. He's always living for the church, right? And also for the life of the world. His life ends up being transferred to the church and then through the church onto the world. The church is knit together in love. In his life, he is bread. He feeds us. We become bread. He was a bread that was broken for us and passed to us, and that knits us together into bread so that we can be broken and passed to the world, where we become like our Lord who gave his life away, and the church reflects him in that way. Well, we see here that he was always giving himself for it. So he didn't just give gifts to the church, he gave himself, and then the church was able to live more, and become who it was intended to be because of the way Christ lived his life and gave his life for the church, right? That's verse 26. He gave himself for it that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Right? So he says, Paul says, Christ gave him his life for the church, and that uh, made it possible for the church to be Well, that it sanctified the church, it cleansed the church, right? It washed the church, and then it transformed the church into a vessel to carry glory. It was a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing. So his love, his giving of himself was transformative so that the church could live its life without spot or blemish. And then it says, so ought men to love their wives as their own bodies, right? The same sort of way that I can live my life in and my body is blessed by it. We can live our life and our wife is blessed by it. And then here's but what's so interesting is because of that connection, that it's actually a feedback loop of life, so to speak, metaphorically speaking. He that loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. Right? If you take your left hand and then you hit it with a hammer using your right hand, you would obviously say, "Oh man, that man hates his hand." But you could also say, "Well, that man hates himself," right? Because your hand is a part of your body. Well, covenantally speaking, we're knit together with our families such that when we are loving our wife, we're loving ourself. We're nourishing and cherishing our own flesh, even as Christ, even as the Lord, the church, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. Now, this is a reference back to Adam and Eve, being the flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. She was, they were united in that sort of way. And then he makes that direct reference in verse 31. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and they shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. And he says, this is a great mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church, right? He talks about Adam and Eve, and he says, and when I talk about Adam and Eve being knit together so close that when a husband loves a wife, when a wife loves a husband, that there is a self-loving, that's how close they are. They are loving themselves by loving one another. He says that is a great mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church, right? That this is at the center of the gospel is that this metaphysic that allows covenantal unity that makes life transferable, so that when we're married, we're knit together and become a single covenantal unit. The same sort of way that when I'm born as a single body, I'm as one person, right? We're covenantally united, such that a family is born out of the vows of a husband and wife, the marriage vows, and the consummation, right? There is a real family that is really truly unified. So that's why taking responsibility is makes the authority of a husband a blessing, and walking away from that is that refusal to take responsibility. That's the abdication that we talked about. Is really using that authority for selfish ends, right? It's using it in a tyrannous way, because you can't not have the connection, right? You can't not have the unity. That's not an option. It's a real metaphysical covenantal unity. But when a husband walks away from that unity, he's and abdicates and won't love his wife in such a way that he takes the uh, takes the authority and says, we are going to be a family that is on the mission that God has given us, right? We are going to be a family that loves one another, that lives by mutual respect. We're going to be a family that confesses sin, that forgives sin, right? And leads the way in those sorts of ways. That it's not an option to say, I'm not going to exercise the authority. The only options are you going to exercise it in a selfish way, or are you going to do what Christ did and use it for, right? For the use that authority to give myself away for. our families, right? For our wife, for our kids. Um, the but that establishment means that your life is transferable to your family. The establishment of that authority means that when you go to work, sacrifice yourself, live in such a way that you put your family first, that your life really will flow to them, right? When you exhaust yourself in loving your family, it nourishes and cherishes them. I remember early on, we had a couple of kids, and I was I was working a factory, working a factory shift. Um, and I would go off to work and, on my feet all day, lifting and carrying heavy materials, getting them to the machines, running them through the machines. And I would be really tired on my way home and think like, "Oh, I can't wait to get home. I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna do the, and I get home and my wife would say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here." Right, because she'd been working all day too, and she had more work to get done. Dinner and cleaning and having little kids. There's just always laundry, right? All she had stuff to do, and she saw me coming and thought, "Oh, that's great. He'll get to spend time. He'll spend time with the kids." And I remember, at first going, "Oh, but I'm so tired. I've been working all day," and then um, God convicted me, and I realized, well, I'm actually not done with the job that God has given me, right? Be fruitful and multiply, right? And now I'm coming home. I'm done with one aspect of the work, take dominion, but I'm not done with another aspect of the work, which is one, take dominion into the next generation, right? But also be fruitful, right? I have pruning to do, and I have watering to do, and all sorts of things to for the fruitfulness. So I'm still going to work, and I started saying, okay, I am going to get a cup of coffee for the ride home because that's what I do on my way to work. And for me, it was an important mindset shift. And the cup of coffee on the way home, I probably couldn't drink a cup of coffee on the way home now. I'd be up all night. But back then, I could lay in bed and drink coffee and then just lay down and go to sleep. But for me, I needed something that helped me shift and change my mind. I have habits and patterns are really the only way for me to be continuously productive. And I needed to find a ritual that helped me shift my mindset. And so drinking a cup of coffee on the way home, just like I drink a cup of coffee on my way to work, helped me remind myself and pray about it and say, okay, Lord, I'm going back to work. I'm on my way to work because the mission that God had given involved loving these kids, filling them up, taking care of my wife, making sure that she had what she needed, not just with the finances and not with just with that, but also being uh, loving the kids that she brought into the world, right? The children, the sons and daughters of her womb, as it says in Proverbs 31, right? That if I really want to love her, then that work of putting in with her kids, or that she was the doorway that they came into the world through, was a big part of giving myself to her, but also being on mission with the Lord. And it was a tough mindset shift for me to make. Um, and a couple of the things that we ended up doing um, to add to this, as my wife and I talked through some ideas, what are some ways that we can that uh what are some other ways, we started Saturday morning adventures that worked really well with my particular schedule, and we lived close to a beach and to redwoods, and right, we had a lot of things that we could do that were free because we never had a lot of money. So we would grab a backpack in the morning. We would make we put snacks in it, sometimes make a lunch, put it in the backpack, And then me and the kids, we would walk out the front door and we would walk up the hill sometimes to the redwoods and we would hike. We would walk up to there was a grocery store, go get ice cream. We would walk. So we would walk, 1, 2, sometimes 3 miles on it. And the kids were pretty little. I mean, I was carrying Cedric half the time, definitely carrying Malachi a lot of the time. We would walk down to the pier and we got a bunch of the short fishing poles and we would fish. We would sometimes throw Malachi into the stroller, but Saturdays, my wife needed some space and some time to be able to get the house cleaned because it was always that's a huge task. And I would throw all of the kids together and we would walk off. And that we have so many good memories from those walks. I have a lot of great memories of lining the kids all up on the rock wall and eating ice cream and um, or sandwiches up in the redwoods and walking up. One time we got up and we turned the wrong way on one of the trails and got completely lost. And I realized that I had no idea where we were, and I'm starting to freak out. But and the kids are like, "Oh, this is amazing! We're walking through the woods without a trail. We've never done this before." And it was just because I had turned wrong and I couldn't find my way back to the trail. I'm trying to just hold it together. And I know if I keep walking towards the ocean, minimally will at least walk out onto the beach and I'll be able to figure out where I am. It was a terrifying moment in my mind, and the kids still have great memories about those hikes. So, um, we found all sorts of creeks that places to jump in the water and we had a lot of fun, but it was an opportunity to really knit my life into theirs and give them myself so that they could live, right. We never had the kind of money where I could buy them lots of gifts, but you notice in that passage Jesus doesn't give just gifts, he gives himself. He is present with his children in order to sow into them himself so that they can be fruitful. So it's a different sort of mindset when you start to say Jesus was incarnate so that he could give his life away. We are carnate and we're not incarnate, right? Because we didn't exist beforehand. We're carnate. The carne asada means meat, right? We're in fleshed. We don't live in flesh lives. We just live flesh lives, right? Um, we are carnate authorities. Jesus had to become incarnate so he could have that sort of life covenant connectedness. That's the thing that makes child rearing different than training an animal, right? You can train up an animal to do all sorts of things, but with children, it's not just that kind of training. And we're going to talk about um, the methods of training and correction that the Bible teaches. But here we can see that the covenant connectedness is what makes child rearing different than training an animal, because you can give your life away such that your wife, your children, your husband, that they live out and through your strength and at times through your faith. One of the most important turning points in my life was when I was in high school, and a gentleman in my church that he had been discipling me. I didn't grow up in church, and so he was the one that would take me aside and say, "Hey, so obviously you don't know this about the way Christians live. Well, now that you're a Christian, now that you're baptized, here's something that you're doing that doesn't align with what how the Bible tells you a Christian should live." Right? He had corrected me. We'd had all sorts of conversations, um, and uh, and and then I crashed my life. I did everything I could to try and ruin my life all at once. And I called him. Well, actually, I just showed up at his office, and he looked at his secretary and said, "It's going to be a little while before I'm back." Right? And we walked out, and we we sat down and I was telling him what I had done and what was going on in my life, and I said, I think I'm done. I don't think my life is gonna make it. It's not gonna mean anything. It's not gonna be good anymore. And he said, well, you know, trust that God's still, he's not done with you. And and I said, I don't know if I can. And he said, he, he said, don't, if you can't trust him right now, just lean on my faith. Let me trust him for you. And tra- he he knew that he was producing the fruit of the spirit of faith in a way that I could feed on his faith. He fed me on his faith and transferred his faith to me, and I couldn't at that moment, but I could lean on him. And I this is the only reason I really got through that summer, that difficult time in life, was because he stood next to me and trusted that, because he had been there when I'd gotten baptized, he had taken vows to be there for me, and he was, and his faith was transferable to me. Well, how much more when it's our children and our wife and our husband, right? That we can um, live in such a way that our faithfulness to the Lord, our trust in Him, transfers to one another through that covenant connectedness. So um, that's why we need to uh, really take responsibility for the state of our household in an active way, and and live in such a way that we um, live and love our families and are present for our families, so that they can live and love and follow the Lord in our wake.